What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the BlockHash podcast. Hope you all are doing well today and having a good start to your week. Today, I have a wonderful guest from Jaeger AI, Albert Castellana, CEO and co-founder, to talk about something they're building in particular called GenLayer and this idea behind AI-powered smart contracts. What does that look like? How do they build them? What are the use cases? And what makes them special and unique? So, Albert, welcome to the show today. Very excited to have you on and a very fascinating topic. So happy to dive into it and learn more. How you doing today, man?
I'm all good. Pretty busy, lots going on, but yeah, I can't complain. And thanks, Brandon, for having me here. It's always good to see you.
Before we dive in, I'm sure people would love to learn a bit more about yourself, maybe your backstory a little bit, get a little bit of context. So maybe that's a good place to start. What's your story? What's your background, and how did you find yourself in this world of Web3 and AI?
Yeah, so I got into crypto in 2013. My background is in computer science. I started by looking into Ethereum. Then I moved into co-founding the NEM Foundation, which was an L1 back in the day, pretty large. Then I was the chief product officer at RxDLT, which is another L1. I met my co-founder, Edgar's there, and then we've been together ever since. We had the idea to create the first liquid staking solution, which was called StakeHound. And then a couple of years ago, we started looking with our third co-founder, JM. We've been looking into, the world of agents, AI agents, like the large language models and so on, right? We were completely fascinated by what you can do with this type of technology, right? It's like you have this black box and, it's capable of spitting out like natural language. It's capable of spitting out even code, right? And what happens if you can, go back and forth, ask it to plan, execute, and, even develop systems on its own, right? And totally fascinated by that. We've done a couple of iterations trying to figure out like, okay, what can this technology really, really be used for, and how is it going to be changing our lives, right? And that's what we're focused on.
Yeah, the world of AI has been very fascinating, and the fact that we're at a point now where it can spit out so much information, you can even start building, code for us and start, really, I think, even with smart contracts and blockchain in this space, it's quite fascinating how quickly it's actually developed. And was that like an inspiration as well behind Jaeger, behind wanting to start GenLayer, or what kind of was the catalyst for that?
Essentially, first was, we were fascinated by LLMs. Having such a system was, kind of mind blowing. So we started this company called Jaeger AI. The focus is just, can we build reliable systems that use this technology to do good, right?
Mhm.
And so we started by building an agent that was capable of building its own tooling. Then we saw that was not very reliable. That's like more or less like, code interpreter, if for those who know. And then we saw that was not very reliable. We're talking like GPT-3, right? Then we moved into building a multi-agent framework, right? Trying to like, okay, if you have a specific vertical, how do you actually make a system that is really reliable? And what we saw there is that it would be really difficult to be competitive in anything that is just code, right? So if you have LLMs that can spit code, pretty much freely, cheaply, and like extremely fast, well, it's going to be really difficult to build any SaaS or anything like this where anybody can come in and disrupt you, right? And if it's not just anybody, it actually can be whatever, Microsoft or Google or OpenAI themselves, right? So with that in mind, we spent quite a few cycles trying to figure out, okay, what can we build that is going to be difficult for newcomers to compete with us? And then obviously, like with our background in crypto, it was very obvious that the crypto economic system is much, more resilient to that, to competition, right? Mm-hmm. So we started by looking into, what can we do there? And we identified pretty quickly that there's some limitations that blockchains have that we think we can attack, right? Some of these limitations stem from, they are completely isolated systems, blockchains, right? They cannot connect to the internet. That's why we have oracles. They can only do code. That's why we have humans in some of the processes, like, multi-sigs and stuff like that, right? So the question is, how could you really build a new type of infrastructure that is capable of natively connecting to the internet, natively understanding natural language and making complex decisions, right? And that's how like GenLayer started, essentially, right? GenLayer is a new type of blockchain that uses AI at the consensus level, so that instead of having a static consensus algorithm, right? I have 5, I'm sending you 3, now I have 2, I'm sending you 6, that should not work, right? What we're doing is we allow for the transactions to be a bit more open, for example, connect to the internet, but then it's a bunch of different validators, each one of them connected to a different LLM that they need to be in agreement that what they saw is acceptable, right? That means that our consensus algorithm is not static, it's dynamic. The developer of a specific application can define the threshold of acceptance for a specific operation, and then the consensus kicks in, where essentially there's it's called optimistic democracy, right? And we'll look into that in just a minute. But essentially the idea is, can we build a blockchain that has smart contracts that can natively connect to the internet, that can natively understand natural language and make complex and subjective decisions, right? And with that, we want to open up and essentially have completely new type of applications.
That's interesting. What's the main benefit for doing this? Why would the Web3 space want to have a layer that's AI powered?
Right. So if you think about it, like, okay, look at crypto lately, right? Hasn't it been a bit boring? Like everything is kind of like the same, little bit, copy paste, small forex, and like incremental improvement, right? As an investor, you need to essentially put your money on something that's kind of old and proven, or something that is extremely complex and you don't understand, or something that you understand it's a joke, like a meme coin or something like this, and then you're vouching for the community and so on, right? What we want to see is, how can we essentially go back to 2018, 19? How can we get essentially completely new primitives that are not possible with existing infrastructure, but would be possible if you, for example, could connect to the internet, right? So if you want to do something like whatever, perpetuals trading on some collectibles, right now you can't do that. You would be able to do it here, right? If you want to do, parametric insurance or prediction markets on literally anything in the world, right? Basically anything in Web3, where right now you have that, you have oracles, and you're probably even limited because the oracles are quite limited in what they can do, right? They're not flexible, right? You can't go and say whatever as a set collectibles, right? So what's the price of sneakers right now, right? So you can't do that because the infrastructure for the oracles is quite static, right? What we're doing is, by having this consensus, it actually allows the network itself, without an external party like the oracle, to be able to go out to the internet and fetch whatever information it wants to fetch, right? Now, obviously, this is a big change because, well, it means that we can do all the deterministic applications that from Web3 today, but on top of those, we can enable endless new applications because our blockchain is literally connected to the internet, right? Compare, like, your phone is essentially like a calculator. If it can't connect to the internet, that's it, right? But if it can connect to the internet, now it opens up endless new opportunities, and that's what we're excited about, right? Like, how can we build new decentralized primitives and protocols that are, leveraging the internet, leveraging, for example, the power of natural language, right? And that's the focus.
Interesting. Do you have any current examples or anything that's been built as of recently that's, can kind of highlight, the power of using AI?
Yeah, I think that the easiest kind of, like, we already have like 3 building on top of GenLayer, which is that prediction markets right now are quite limited, right? They need humans in the loop, basically, to be able to make some of those subjective decisions, right? Who's the president of the US? Okay, if you go to one website, it's going to be Joe Biden, and the other one is going to be Biden, right? Is Joe Biden and Biden the same, right? So that's this subjective nature, right? So prediction market is a very clear one. We have this product called intelligent oracles, which is basically, you need to not just be able to go and fetch information from the internet. You need to be defining the things correctly, right? Like, most of the problems we see right now in prediction markets is that, the spec of the oracle is not properly defined. And then it's a bunch of humans that are actually taking tons of time, like a week or something like this. This costs like, thousands of dollars to get some protocols to actually have this DAO structure to come and give you a response, right? Now, if you can go from $5,000 for a single bet down to a few dollars for a single bet, that obviously means way more type of products that can be built on top, way more volume and, value being created through that, right? So there's really quite a lot that you can do in this model. You can look, for example, at DAOs, right? Like, there's many DAOs out there, but ultimately most of them are just a multi-sig. And then it's a bunch of people in that multi-sig that are listening to Snapshot, and they essentially do the bidding of the community through their multi-sig boat, right? So the question is, what happens if you have what we call an intelligent contract that defines the rules of the DAO? And then the DAO itself, that's the network, can go to Snapshot, see the proposals, the weights and the votes and so on, and make a decision on what's the best outcome, right? Now, this subjective threshold that I was saying before, that means that the developer can say, okay, yeah, as long as the validators agree that this is the best approach. But what does it mean? Is it that it's valid? Is it that it's valid and it's legal, for example? Is it that it's valid, legal, and has the best ROI, right? They will be able to define that. And instead of being humans doing that understanding and subjective decision making, it becomes a bunch of LLMs each one of them with their own biases and perspective, agreeing on a specific output. So it's a completely different type of architecture than what you see on any blockchain right now, right? It's back to this, static consensus versus dynamic consensus and the type of things that this opens up.
Does Jaeger AI have its own proprietary AI that's kind of powering this for GenLayer, or are you guys tapping into an existing LLM?
No, so maybe, I mean, the answer is no, right? What we want is as much diversity of opinions as possible, right? So let's maybe like take that back a bit, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have this consensus algorithm called optimistic democracy.
Mm-hmm.
What this does is you have a bunch of nodes, let's say 1,000 nodes in the network, and when there's a transaction, a subset of them are selected at random to verify the transaction. Each one of those validators are connected to a different LLM. It doesn't matter, right? Can go to OpenAI, can go to some Llama 3 that they're running locally, they can go to some router network. That doesn't really matter, right? Whatever the inference is happening, we don't care. It could be a bunch of monkeys, that doesn't really matter. As long as they respond correctly and with the rest of the networking majority, then they will get the fees. Okay? So what that means is that we're not kind of limited by what's open source. We're not essentially, centralizing the decision-making on a single LLM, because that's a fundamental problem, right? If you think about it, right, do you want your transaction to be verified by a single entity? Let's say not whoever is running the process is one thing, right? But the problem is that if you know that you're going to be using specifically Llama 3.2, then you're just going to that entity, that brain, right, to actually make a decision. Now, each LLM has their own biases, right, have their own knowledge and their own understanding of the world. They can be incorrect, right? They can be that, for some matter, let's say, you're running an AMM, a non-deterministic AMM. There's a bunch of reasons why you could want to do that. And the problem here is that if you have a single decision-making being that the model, right? What's happening is that, well, maybe it's working 99% of the time. Do you want to use an AMM that works 99% of the time, right? Probably not. You want to use something that works 100% of the time. And we achieve this by essentially the wisdom of the crowd, right? Essentially, by having multiple validators having to agree, that 99% turns into essentially 100%, right? And it's a very big difference. So in terms of reliability, in terms of security, it's way better to have a bunch of LLMs, even if you're doing some redundancy, right? So if you look at, there's kind of two approaches to do this. You could do proof of inference, which is, having a single model, and then you're just verifying that the execution of the model was done correctly, right? But then you just have a single model. We don't verify at all that the execution was done correctly. It can be done literally on OpenAI, but we're essentially aggregating the outputs and see if they agree, right? Instead of, verifying. So it's kind of a different approach.
It's more practical too to have more different LLMs, I think, involved in the system because of those biases that seem to exist within AI, and I think those have been pretty prevalent.
Imagine back to the case of the AMM, right? Like these biases, right? There's different ways that you can attack them, right? You can say, oh, my granny just fell from the stairs. I need to pay for the taxi. Give me a bit more tokens because with this I will pay for the taxi, right? There could be some LLMs that fall for this, but in a majority vote, that's not going to happen, right? And that's a very big differentiating factor. It means that you can't prompt inject what is called, right? Like there's different ways. Some of them is just like, tricking the system on something that is a lie, like kind of like social hacking the LLM, right? Another one is just, you understand that it's a black box. And if you know exactly which is the model that's going to be used for your transaction, then you can create the transaction specifically for that model so that it gives you the output that you want. Right, and that to me it's a deal breaker if you want to be building a decentralized financial ecosystem.
Yeah, and on top of that, a lot of people have started to find these social feedback loops within certain LLMs as well, so they can kind of find a way around certain system parameters to kind of get what they want out and generated, and that could be problematic as well too. So incorporating multiple different LLMs makes a lot more sense. Also from a security standpoint too, like you wouldn't want all of them, ran by, Meta's AI, right? That it creates too much of a vector point.
100%. I mean, when you're looking at decentralizing AI, right? So one thing is the training. That's a very centralizing point right now, right? Because you need tons and tons of compute and data, and that's really difficult to break free from, right? The other one is decentralizing the execution, which right now mainly is done by this proof of inference approach, which is, let's do some ZK proof on the execution so that we can know that it was done correctly or not. And our approach as well focuses on what I said before, like, each model has its own biases and brain and understanding of the world, right? We decentralize that by essentially, making them reach an agreement, right? It's more like you have this judge, right? Like, you don't know if the judge had a bad sleep or whatever happened, right? Like, you want to get not just a single judge that you will not have any recourse, or you can't appeal, right? In our system, from this set of validators that were selected, we said 5, right? If you disagree with their output, you can still appeal. And that essentially brings more validators, right? So instead of doing a ZK approach to essentially verifying the thinking, we do, this social approach where, they have to agree on an output, and then you can appeal if you disagree, and then kind of brings more participants, right? If you have the whole network going to a single resource or coming up with a single decision and you disagree, well, that's life. It's probably that they are more correct, I think, in general than if you just yourself, right?
Other than AI-powered smart contracts, have you thought of other meaningful ways in which maybe AI can be combined with blockchain, either currently or in the near future?
Yeah. So, because we're saying AI-powered smart contracts, right? Like, ultimately, if you think about it, natural language is much more powerful than code. There's things in natural language that you can define that are not possible to define in code, right? I said before, is this proposal from the DAO legal? It's impossible to code legal, right? But, LLMs can understand that, they will have their subjective decision on whether, yes, it's legal or no, right? But ultimately, you can do much more than what you can do with code, right? Now, when you're writing an intelligent contract, you're essentially mixing both. So you can do normal, let's say, smart contracts, right? Only code. You can essentially merge them with, or mix a bunch of different non-deterministic operations that can be, go out to the internet and fetch some information. Let's say, for example, that this information, again, is the price of some sneakers, right? And now you want to create, a perpetuals market on that, for example. You can absolutely do that here, right? Or you can go from stuff like, you want to make a game, right? Here's how you build a truly decentralized game where the generation of what's happening in the game is actually just, the consensus of these different LLMs coming out with a decision on what's going on. Does that make sense? Yeah. So if you think about where are we all heading, right? AIs are going to be everywhere. We all have, we will all have our AGIs in our pocket, right? And the way I look at it is they will need some legal framework to be able to interact with each other and do commerce with each other, right? Do you want your AGI and my AGI to be dealing with each other through lawyers, extremely expensive and slow, smart contracts, no natural language, no processing of image, no capabilities to connect to the internet? Or here's a third way, a new type of contracts that essentially allows our AIs to, for example, agree on a contract and then have the network be the judge for that, right? So you can have arbitration of these different contracts. You can have that it can be doing the escrow. It can be doing the verification of what's actually happened, right? So imagine that, for example, you want someone to help you, whatever, write a post, right? Or do some marketing campaigns, right? There you have that the network itself is capable of going and verifying that this happened. And if they agree that this happened, then they can release the escrow, right? So imagine something like Upwork, right? Or there's really many things you can do like this, right? You can do stuff like, I don't know, you can sign a transaction, you can post it on Twitter, and then the network itself can go fetch your Twitter post, fetch that signature, and now the blockchain knows that you're that Twitter handle, right? Oh, you've got 10 million followers. Maybe I can give you an under collateralized loan, for example, right? So you can do tons of things that just the way things are right now. Like if I tell you, for example, a slashing insurance, why is there no slashing insurance in the market that is not centralized? Well, because this is off-chain information, right? Ethereum doesn't know if this specific account got slashed or not, right? This is on another, that's on the beacon chain, right? So what's happening here is that you can have that the network is capable of seeing if your account got slashed, and then, you can get your insurance.
Interesting. Yeah, I could see it in a lot of different roles potentially, especially as intermediaries, arbitration. I even think for transactions as well, helping people auto-complete transactions so they don't send it to the wrong wallet or lose their money. That's also been a long-standing issue in the space.
Yeah, absolutely. You could do that. You could also, for example, before I mentioned the non-deterministic AMM, right? That's kind of interesting to think about, right? No, if I trade something, I want it to be extremely clear what I'm going to get out from it, right? But what happens, for example, if the curve say, for example, the bonding curve changes depending on what's actually happening on social media, or if the fee or the litigation or the liquidation levels change depending on, for example, how much liquidity or depth there is in a centralized exchange, right? So you have things in DeFi already that could be improved thousandfold if you could actually get that it's capable of connecting to the internet and making these decisions, right? So I understand that we can call them AI smart contracts, right? Ultimately, it's not. I mean, that's I think a subset of that. For example, let's say the game for sure. Like that's an AI making the decision on what you find when you open the chest, right? But ultimately, like I wouldn't say that a slashing event on and essentially an insurance on slashing, right? You care so much about the AI side of things, but just about the being able to query anything on the internet. Now, the AI is how essentially they reach an agreement on something that is non-deterministic, such as going out to the web, right? The problem is that the web is non-deterministic. The blockchain wants determinism, right? And it's how you bridge that gap. Our approach is to have this consensus that uses AI to do that, right? To bridge that gap, right? But really, like it's a superset of anything you can do anywhere else. But on top of this, like complex decision making, that really opens up tons of things. Natural language, we can't even imagine, to be honest, right? And then being able to connect to the internet, it just it means as well that you can do different type of privacy computations. You can do a specific. There's lots of things you can do like that.
We live in a more semantic world now, right? And the internet is a very different place than it was even just 10 years ago. It's much more interconnected. We have every single device is talking to another device within our own home and our own networks, and globally and locally. And there's so much information out there, and I feel like there's AI on my computer now, on my phone. Every website I go to has its own AI. Like it's built into just about everything at this point. So it's a no-brainer, like to have it in blockchain too, and for those components.
Essentially, the way I like the claim would be, the world is not black and white, right?
Yeah.
And code understands black and white, but doesn't understand anything else. But so if you want to do insurance on weather conditions, like your crop got wasted, right? Maybe you can get an insurance on that. You can absolutely do it in this mechanism because you don't have the overhead of humans going back and forth and making a decision, for your small claim, right? Could be big, could be small. The problem is that right now that's just not possible, right? So we're just using humans to complicate the decision making, while instead we know that AI is faster, cheaper, and in general more unbiased. To be honest, right? Because how many of us know how what the SEC process looks like for for listing an ETF, right? So if there's a prediction market on an ETF, probably me as a user of these DAOs, for example, I'm not going to be able to know all the detail that I need to know for making a proper decision, right? Ultimately, if you want to use the wisdom of the crowd, it needs to be correct enough. Otherwise, it kind of goes down to worse value and to worse decision making, right? And that's what I think AI really helps, right? It just makes it much more performant and effective, really.
If there's a developer out there that wanted to start building with GenLayer, what's the best way to go about doing that? Would they go to the website and just start there? Is there a toolkit? Is there documentation somewhere?
Yeah. So if you go to the website, we're always trying to put as much documentation as possible out there so that it's easy to get started. We have this thing called the GenLayer simulator, which is while we're not in testnet or mainnet, that's going to be coming down the line. Essentially, we're aiming for testnet by the end of the year. But essentially, until then, anybody can run with a couple commands on their local machine already. What we call the GenLayer simulator. You can write intelligent contracts. You can already try and build on top of that. And we're working towards making that as seamless to move from your local computer to the testnet, then to mainnet as possible over the coming months, right? So lots of documentation out there. We will be putting much more out there as well. We're working on some tooling as well to make it easy because AI is kind of insane on what it can write code itself, right? So can we help it so that it helps you write new applications, right? Absolutely. So yeah, trying to facilitate as much as possible, right? Ultimately, you can think about it's like an Ethereum in terms of the transaction model and everything. Only that there's this appeal mechanism so that these AIs can get an agreement. But essentially, dApps look the same as they do in Ethereum, right? You will be connecting your wallet. You will be having a transaction. Now, how that transaction get calculated, that's a different matter, right? And it's why. So yeah, I mean, the simulator is the way to start, I think, right now.
How close do you think we are to ordinary people being able to build things themselves without having to learn how to be a developer and how to code themselves, through AI maybe. Like, for example, I don't know jack shit when it comes to coding. I understand the industry very well, but I don't understand how to code anything. I'd never build a smart contract, but the idea of AI maybe helping me as a tool to kind of do that might be very fascinating. And maybe there's some creative things that someone like me could do. Are we close to that point? I know we're inching closer, but I don't know how realistic it is.
Yeah, I think we're actually getting really, really close. There's two tracks that I would look at here. One of them is you can, at least in GenLayer, intelligent contracts, you can potentially write them in natural language and in any language, right?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
if you go to the OpenAI GPT store, you'll see that there's millions of GPTs that people have built, right? Just with natural language, zero coding whatsoever, right? The problem is that if you want them to be, transacting and moving assets up and down and doing this type of things, I think that that's a bit harder to actually put together, right? Now we're writing these intelligent contracts in Python, right? So Python is the language that most of the machine learning algorithms, most of AI has been built on, right? It has like 30 to 35% of market share among developers. Solidity, it's way lower. Like we're talking less than 1%, right? By doing this, what it means is that you can literally go to Claude and essentially ask it to write this thing, and it will give you a pretty good approximation. But then I don't know if you've tried the O1 preview or like from OpenAI. That really can be thinking quite well, right? So it's this using this thing like chain of thought, and it's actually the outputs of this pretty much you can use right away, right? And I think that there's another benefit to this, which is that it's teaching you on a lot of things that are it's teaching what's necessary, right? So like, do you really need to write the whole code? Probably not, but if you understand a bit how it works, like you can ask it directly interactively and so on, right? So I think we're gonna be there extremely soon. There's a bunch of tools like the Replit agent, for example, which is super helpful on the deployment side of things. These tools are really getting there. So we think that by the time we launch, it's most likely that anybody will be able to create their own intelligent contracts by then.
That's fascinating. It's going to be a very interesting world when that happens.
Things are going to
Well,
be changing very much over the next few months and years. I think this decade it's going to be insane, and we just want to build something that is capable of like going through it and survive, right? Which is very difficult. Like we don't know what AGI will be, we don't know what ASI will be, right? It's essentially we're going through a step change. We have no idea what's above the step, right? And then like, how do we build something that we think will make sense up there, right? And this is the challenge. But I think we're there. Like essentially, as AI will become better, the way that we've defined the architecture of the system, the whole system will become better too, right? Because we're not fixing which is the model that's going to be used in the validator process, right? So it means that if AI becomes 100 times more powerful, GenLayer becomes 100 times more powerful. You're going to be able to do way many more things than what you can do right now, right? This DAO example, right? Like it will be able to say, okay, do a discounted cash flow analysis and choose which is the proposal that makes most sense from a return of investment, right? It will be able to do that. Today, it can't do that. It's not smart enough for that, right? So it's like, how do we build something that will be able to stand all this change?
what's going into your guys' roadmap? Looking at 2025, how do you want to continue building out GenLayer? Is there anything you're working on in terms of tooling? I know you mentioned some of that a little bit, or some things developers could use with it, or maybe directions you want to take it, that you can reveal that maybe isn't lock and key right now.
When you're building like this type of foundational layers, right? Like they have tons of work, right? From the wallet to the explorers to there's tons and tons of different things you need to do, right? We're aiming for testnet this by the end of the year, right? So that's why we welcome anybody to come and try to build on it already. I think that anybody can already do that, right? But then when we're looking at 2025, that's going to be mainnet, and that's going to be as well, a bunch of different applications that we think are very important for people to really understand what this is about, right? Now you're looking at, there's thousands of blockchains out there, thousands, right? The question is, what's the difference between them? They all have the same type of features, all of them, right? Maybe one is faster or cheaper or something like that, right? What if you have a new type of blockchain that really like opens up the piñata of, use case that you can do, right? And what we want to make is that people understand this. So like, I appreciate very much you having me on the podcast, because I want to make sure that people understand what you will be able to do with this new approach, right? And this will only come, through better tooling, for example, making it very easy for anybody to come, like I want to have a very simple package that I can give any developer or even non-developer, and they can start with their ideas, right? Here, it's a bit different as well, because like here it means that not only financial applications are possible in GenLayer, so that means that, you don't need to start with a lawyer next to you from day one. That I think it's a good thing, right? So yeah, just try to make it easy for anybody to come and build on top of the platform.
Excited to see how you continue to develop it out, and where you take GenLayer. I definitely think AI, smart contract layers, powered by AI, are definitely going to be something of the future here very soon, and already with what you guys are doing. And I think it'll make it a lot easier for people to build out some very creative things on top of blockchain. And I think it'll make the systems a lot more secure. Because I think it'll squash a lot of bugs, fill in holes and gaps, areas where there's been, I think, a lot of attack vectors in the past that have kind of plagued this space. And I think AI can really, plug some of those gaps. So, very excited to see where you guys take it and how you continue to develop it out. So, Albert, thank you for taking the time to come on, share what you guys are doing. And I would love to have you back on in the future too, so you can get some progress updates.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I really appreciate the time. And yeah, I'll big fan of your show and looking forward to speaking again.